Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and you're listening to The Business of Content, a podcast about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. In this week's episode, we're talking to a sports podcast host who monetizes his show with a paid texting service. With the journalism industry in freefall, there's a good chance that your local newspaper is experimenting with some kind of digital subscription offering. In many cases, this involves some kind of metered paywall where you're expected to start paying after consuming a predetermined number of articles. Hundreds of newspapers have installed paywalls like this, but they've seen mixed results, with many reporting disappointing revenue numbers. But is content the only thing an audience will pay for? That's a question Doug LeMorace, a Cleveland.com sports columnist, sought to answer. A few years ago, he co-founded a popular sports podcast, but had a difficult time attracting advertisers. Then some executives from his newspaper's parent company approached him with a new product called Subtext. It provides a simple way to allow paying subscribers to exchange text messages with Doug and other hosts. The service was a surprise hit, and Doug now uses the app to crowdsource questions for the podcast and send his paying subscribers quick hit analysis when Ohio sports news breaks. I interviewed Doug about how he incorporated texting into his show and what other local journalism outfits can learn from his success. Before we jump into the interview, I want to talk about my newsletter. Currently, there are no ads on this show. The only way to support it is by becoming a subscriber to my Substack. Subscribing gets you tons of industry analysis. You'll receive long-form interviews from media entrepreneurs, industry news roundups, and long-form articles that dive deep on media trends. There's a paid version, but you should actually start by testing out the free newsletter by simply going to simonowens.substack.com. That's simonowens.substack.com. Or just Google the words Simon Owens and newsletter. Subscribing not only helps support this podcast, but it gets you lots of additional insights that will help you with your career. Okay, on to my interview with Doug. Hey Doug, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So how would you officially label yourself? Would you call yourself a sports journalist or a sports columnist?
Oh, both, neither, all. I think I'm a sports columnist. I write a lot of opinion. I put myself in a lot of stuff and try to provide my expertise. But I'm still a journalist, but I would say at the moment, yes, certainly more a sports columnist.
And because the complicated way that newspapers and their websites work, like you wouldn't consider yourself like a newspaper columnist. You are, even though some of your stuff appears in a print newspaper, you really think of yourself as kind of like a web first type columnist, right? What's the relationship? So what's the name of the newspaper you're affiliated with, but what's the main website that you write for?
So it's the Cleveland Plain Dealer, which is the largest paper in Ohio, but the website is cleveland.com. And I think thinking like a digital journalist is the way to think right now. And the issue is we write so much at cleveland.com in sports and news that it can't all fit in the paper. So I don't think about the paper when I write, but most of my most important stuff does go in the paper, but it's just an avalanche of content sometimes on the site. So, I don't think like, hey, this would be a great Sunday story for the paper, but I might write an interesting in-depth story for the website that turns out to be a Sunday story for the paper, but it's all digital first.
And so what's your specific beat? Or it was originally just like one Ohio team, right? But then you kind of expanded to all Ohio sports?
So my primary area is the Ohio State football team, Ohio State University. I've been at this job for 15 years, and that's what I did specifically for most of it. But in the last couple of years, when I took on my columnist title, I do write about the other teams we care about now. I can write about anything in sports, but my main concentration remains Ohio State football.
And your newspaper is owned by Advance Publications, right?
Correct.
And does it use like a paywall or anything like that, or is it still just mainly advertising focused?
Constantly evolving. By the time this airs, it may have changed. I mean, I'm kidding, but I mean, we are constantly changing what we do. So at the moment, in the last couple of months, we have gone to a half paywall where a lot of our content still is free. But if you subscribe, there are subscriber exclusive stories on the site. Some of the more analytical things, some of the more in-depth things. So it's a combo model. We try to make money in a bunch of different ways right now, but there still are a lot of free stories on our site.
And what's kind of your regular output of content these days, both in terms of like writing and podcasting?
So believe it or not, at the moment, I probably think about writing actual stories third on my list of things that I do for my job. Probably number one is podcasting. We've been doing 5 podcasts a week about Ohio State football since April, since we leaned in. We used to do once a week. Now we do 5 times a week since the pandemic started. Second is providing informational tidbits and analysis to our tech subscribers, which is kind of like a tweet, but people pay for it. And then the third thing is I still write for the site, but I spend a lot of time and energy doing those other 2 things. So I'm still a journalist. I'm still a columnist. I love writing, but the other things that I do are not extras. They are primary parts of my job. And so my output on the site isn't maybe what it once was, but I still work a lot. Just my bosses should know that I still work a lot.
That's interesting that like with less sports, you went to a 5 times a week schedule for the podcast.
We have heard from people that we are their lifeline, that we have helped people get through the pandemic because we have previewed a lot of things. We've had fun. We've done weird, goofy stuff, and we've talked about history, but because there wasn't as much else going on, people were looking for something. And so it is a bit contradictory, but it also kind of makes sense that we really filled a gap for people who really care about Ohio State football. And we gave them something to think and talk about 5 days a week for however many months it's been. And
how did you start the podcast? Like, what's the format?
Bunch of dudes sitting around yakking. Mm-hmm. We're raw. When we got started on this, Simon, man, you're so professional about this stuff. I was like, man, we really need to up our game on our own podcast. We've been doing it since 2015. It's just 3 of us who cover Ohio State. We take a lot of questions from tech subscribers, but it's mostly us sitting around talking about topics that we bring up, themes or ideas and questions that tech subscribers send us. But it's mostly just a conversation between 3 people 5 days a week.
And so it's like a very personality-driven podcast. Like I listen to these kinds of podcasts like Pod Save America. I can probably think of a few others where you're really kind of trying to be immersed in this world of these people who feel like your friend, right?
Yeah, we call it Buckeye Talk. It's the Buckeye Talk family. I'm an acquired taste. I have a big personality, and some people don't like that. But if you hang with us long enough, I think it does feel like that. And I'm not just saying that. We hear it because we had such a back and forth with our tech subscribers. And we've had some live Zoom calls since the pandemic where, we've had people come in and ask us questions over video face to face so we can see them and they can see us. And that's what they're telling us. But I do think, yes, they like Ohio State football. There are probably at least 10 or 12 outlets dedicated to covering Ohio State football. So if you just want the football, you have a lot of places to get it, but they like our version of it, and that's definitely personality driven.
And you said you launched it in 2015?
Correct.
And so how fervent did the podcast audience get like right away? Like, was it quick growth where there was, obviously you've been writing for 10 plus years, 15 years for the newspaper. So you probably had like a fan base. Was it just this immediate audience or what, like, how did it grow in terms of like where you started feeling like, wow, this is like a real strong fan base of the podcast?
It grew pretty quickly. And I like to tell the story a lot that I very seldom have people come up to me and say, hey, it's you. I like your story. That almost never happens. But they do come up and say, hey, it's you. I like the podcast. It became a way for people to connect to us very, very quickly. And it was raw. We did podcasts sitting in cars in McDonald's parking lots after football games. Yeah. We had fast food debates. We were really raw and rough and weird. And a certain kind of person grasped onto that. So I think very quickly, I have covered Ohio State for the Cleveland Plain Dealer and Cleveland.com for a long time. But the podcast is Buckeye Talk, and we sort of consider everything we do an extension of Buckeye Talk now. And that happened pretty quickly because Buckeye Talk is our brand. The podcast helped brand everything else we do because people did connect to it.
And did your bosses right away, like I'm guessing when you launched in 2015, it was just after the serial rush of, people flocking to podcasts. There was still not a lot of newspapers making good money on it. Was it just kind of pitched as like a side project? And how quickly did they recognize the importance of it, of you being able to put aside a significant amount of time for it?
Like we've been doing it for 5 years, and they maybe realized it like a year ago.
Yeah.
So for like 4 years, we felt like we were in the forest. I was in meetings begging for someone to pay for us to get a better microphone. I said, "Can we get a better microphone? Can we just get a microphone?" And then one of the big bosses sent me a microphone. So I appreciated that. So it just wasn't a priority. It was not a priority, and there were people out there who were at less established outlets than us doing popular podcasts. And we had a meeting and I said, we should have the best podcasts. Cleveland.com should have the best podcasts on Cleveland and Ohio sports. Why don't we? And so we just started. And we did it on our own. And it has been an amazing transformation to watch that our company just did not care at all. And now they care a lot. They care a lot right now about podcasts.
So let's talk about why. But prior to launching your current text messaging membership program, it was pretty difficult to monetize the podcast, right?
Virtually impossible for us, at least. Yes.
Why? Because like the ad team at Cleveland.com wasn't trained to really sell podcast ads, or were advertisers still only like really interested in national podcasts? Like what was the reason behind that?
Yes and yes, I think are the two answers to that. And there was a time where my sports editor and I went around Columbus because, again, we're Cleveland.com. I live 2 hours away from Cleveland in Columbus because that's where Ohio State is. So we do fight a little bit of an uphill battle that we're not like the hometown place, but we care about Ohio State football a lot. So we went around and we sold 2 ads a couple years ago, me and the sports editor, going around to businesses and trying to pitch our podcast. But I don't think we were equipped to sell it previously. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but I don't know that anybody would argue that. We didn't really know how to package it. It was an uphill battle. I think we didn't know how to price it sometimes. And the result was we were doing a podcast for many, many years that we didn't make a cent on.
And also it probably wasn't really your job. Like you had lots of other things, so you couldn't focus singularly on, figuring out how to lure advertisers.
Right. I mean, and it was, we really tried to, we had some people who were listeners who wanted to advertise with us at times. And we just couldn't figure out sort of the pricing structure. And I think there was maybe just some thinking of, well, this is how it used to be, and we had advertisers who maybe wanted to throw us a couple bucks. And listen, a couple bucks in my mind was better than nothing because we were doing the podcast anyway, but it maybe didn't fit our advertising strategy. And so now we have a strategy. And they're really leaning into that. And I'm not mad about it. I was frustrated about it for a long time. I get it. We're all kind of new to this, but I thought for a while we had a good podcast that people liked, and we couldn't figure out a way to make money on it.
Oh, but you had like listeners who were reaching out and telling you, I would love to throw you a few bucks and pay for the podcast. But you didn't really know what to do with that right at first. Like there was no way for you to take their money.
Right. We had some listeners who owned small businesses who wanted to be an actual advertiser. And then we had other people who said, we love the podcast. We would pay for it if there was a way to pay for it. And we thought, should we open a Patreon account? Should we do what could we do to let journalism in the modern era? What can we do to let people give us money? And we just didn't get there. And then this tech subscription model cracked open the door for us, but we did have trouble kind of finding that before.
So tell me about the origin of that. So like because the platform that you use was actually created by a company that's owned by your parent company, right?
Yes, I don't know the specifics of it, but I imagine that the people at Advance are sitting in a little laboratory trying to come up with ways to save journalism. And the tech subscription was one of those things. Yes. Yeah,
it's called Alpha Labs or something like that. John Cohn, I think that's his name.
David Cohn.
David Cohn. Yeah. He runs this kind of startup incubator within Advance that is coming up with these new kind of startups and stuff like that are owned by the parent company. And they approached you about, hey, we have this kind of text messaging platform. We're looking for people to test it out. Would you be interested? Right.
Right. So, and again, I don't even know what I'm supposed to say about this or not, but I'll just tell you what happened.
Sure.
So I'm the guy in the meeting who complains in every meeting and says what I think. And if they don't like it, that's fine, which is good and bad. But the same boss who sent me the microphone, the big boss from New Jersey who sent me the microphone when I complained about that, said when this tech subscription thing came up, he said, I know some disgruntled sports writers in Cleveland who I think would be interested in this. And I can't remember the exact thing, but he had 3 parts of what makes a success when you want to launch something new. And being angry about the status quo is one of the 3 parts. And that's me. I was angry about the status quo. Why can't we do better at this or better at that? So when they started it, they came to us in Cleveland and they came to sports first because sports drives so much of the digital era in journalism. And so we started with the Cleveland Browns, the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Cleveland Indians, and Ohio State football. And we started with the 4 main people who cover those 4 teams. And that's how we launched this tech subscription model in either March or April of 2019.
And how did you originally design the membership? Like, we'll talk about how it evolved, but like, what was when in the original iteration, what would people pay for it and what would they get for it?
So I think it was $3.99 off the bat. $3.99 per month right off the bat, 14-day free trial. And the biggest thing was trying to get people to wrap their head around it. So you tried to explain it to people, but you had to really give them a little taste for them to understand it. And then the idea was, we will send you 1 or 2 things a day that will show up in your phone as a text. And it will be a little bit of news, some analysis, something interesting, a tidbit that we heard about the team that you love. And you don't have to go search for it. You don't have to come to our website. You don't have to be on Twitter wading through the morass of what Twitter is. We come directly to you. And we've talked a lot at Cleveland.com about the key is to get in people's phones. So we want you to subscribe to our podcast. So we're just in your phone. And this was a way to get written content in people's phones for not very much money per month, but it was additional personal contact, and you could respond to the texts. And now we don't guarantee this, but then we might have a personal interaction back and forth with you as well. So it was trying to get in their phone directly without the consumer having to do any work.
And you pitched it heavily on the podcast, right? Like that was your main kind of selling point.
We've been very successful with it on Ohio State because of the podcast, because this loyal audience that we had not been able to monetize for years that was asking us, how can we give you money? I pitched it to them on the podcast repeatedly as, this is your chance. It's not even about whether you like the idea of the text necessarily, but do us a favor and try it. If you like us, we're trying to survive. Do this for us as a favor. It's $4 a month. Try it. Just try it and see what you think. So, you know, you've got to get people to like the idea, but I almost guilted them into it because we had built up this loyal audience for years. And we never knew. It just so happened it finally converged. We had the audience previously, and that mattered a lot. I do think sometimes I wrap my head around, it's like, hey, if you don't already have the audience and you try to explain this to people, well, how do you explain it to them? You just tweet at someone and say, hey, let me send you things that are kind of like tweets right into your phone. It's really hard to understand. But when you have a built-in loyal audience, it was very easy to get some portion of them on board right away.
And then you incorporated it into the podcast itself, which we'll talk about in a second. But first, tell me how the text messaging works on your end. Because even though users receive it as a text message, you're not sending it as like a typical text, right?
No, it's on a platform. I can do it just like on a browser, that I can do it on my computer or on my phone. I go in there and I type out the message, which is however many characters it is. It's longer than a tweet, but it's not very long. I type that out and I send it. I hit a send button and then it goes out to people and it shows up in their phone as a text. Then they can text back just like they text to a friend, but that text does not come back to my phone. It goes again into the website, into the app, where then I can read a list of, here's the first message I sent out. Here are all the replies to that message. And then I can go in there, see their reply, and then respond specifically to that reply, again, all on the computer or on the phone. So I'm not texting, but you're receiving it as a text. So that's the important thing. For the reader, for the consumer, it's a text, but it's not like, I think people had a view of it that was wrong, of like, all these poor reporters, they're being besieged by texts all day. And that's not what it is. It's not me texting, it's you texting that is cool.
And it's great for a podcast because can't you just give them a phone number to start texting to, and then it like starts to opt them in and stuff like that, versus trying to get them to go to a URL to sign up?
Yes, it used to be they had to go to a link, and now we have the number 614-350-3315. Mm-hmm. I'm like a used car salesman pitching the phone number all the time. You text anything to that phone number, a link pops up on your phone, sign up right here, put your phone number in to sign up, and away we go. And that's it. It's super easy, but all you have to do is text that phone number. And again, it makes it even more of a texting experience because it's just typing something to a phone number, which is what people are used to doing.
And you mentioned that it's Twitter-like. I think when we spoke before, you said that it changed your Twitter game because things that you would normally send out on Twitter, suddenly you had this other venue to start sending it out. And you're like, why give this away for free when I can kind of give my quick analysis via text message and they're getting something exclusive, right?
Yeah, I do not tweet anything of value anymore. So if you follow me on Twitter, you can unfollow me if you want, right? I mean, I understand the idea of building a brand on Twitter, but I'm old. I am who I am. If you like Ohio State football and you haven't heard of me by now, I'm probably not going to get through to you. So Twitter doesn't really do much for me. I tweet out the links to my stories, right? And I appreciate people who follow me. Hey, here's the latest thing I wrote on the site. But if I'm just going to have a thought, hey, this is my expertise boiled down into a little nugget that I think you'll find interesting, why am I giving that away? Why am I giving that away? Journalists have been now trained to give things away on Twitter, and they think there's value in that. But I would challenge them to actually tell me what the value is. Really tell me how you and your company are getting value and making money off of this. So I'm out. I tweet dad jokes and links to my stories. But if I'm actually giving you my expertise about the team that I have covered for 15 years, I'm going to ask you to pay $4 a month to get that. And by the way, you don't have to scroll through all the other stupid tweets out in the world to get to my good stuff. I'm sending it straight to you. But I don't tweet the kind of stuff I used to tweet about the team I cover anymore.
And what happened after you first announced it? Like, did you see an immediate wave of signups?
There was that. We definitely had an initial group of however many, couple hundred people that were just like, we've been waiting for this. This is our thank you to the pod, and that they came in right away. And also some people who are like, well, I don't know. We'll try it. I mean, why wouldn't I try it? So if you like the podcast, it was like, well, why not try it? There's not a lot of risk in it. And then so we did get that initially, and I think we had a bigger boost at the start on the Ohio State beat because we had the biggest podcast, and that is a direct correlation. And then after that, the more we tied it into the podcast and talked about it on the podcast, not just as an ad, hey, try the text as an ad, but as this is the loop, that I think got more people like, well, if I love the podcast, and I pitch it as that, if you love the podcast, it's the podcast in your phone.
Yeah.
It's the same vibe. It's the same feel. You know, it's if you like hearing it, then maybe you'll like reading it a couple times a day. So we had an initial wave, and then I think we built on it by continually tying it into the podcast.
And you created like a feedback loop. So like people would text you, you would read the text on the podcast, right? And then that would create really good content. But then also people would be like, oh, what's this text messaging thing? If I want to contribute content to the podcast, like I need to be on this text messaging platform. So it would create that feedback loop, right?
I hope people listening felt like they were missing out if they weren't on the texts. And it doesn't mean you can't enjoy the podcast, but like it's the next level that you're helping produce the podcast. I say you become a podcast producer. We have things where sometimes what a texter sends us becomes a whole episode. We have podcasts where we take 20 rapid fire questions that are all from texters. And again, we were in the habit of that because I used to put out a call on Twitter, hey, send us questions for the podcast. And now I don't do that anymore. If you aren't a tech subscriber, you don't get to ask us questions. You can listen for free, and we appreciate everybody who does that. But we are not taking your question if you don't throw us $4 a month. And I don't think that's too much to ask. But we don't just ask questions. We will when we have a topic, we'll say, what are your thoughts on this? And I'll read 40 or 50 responses of, this is what Ohio State fans are feeling about this issue. I send out surveys and I say, what do you think on this? Yes or no? And then we say 68% of the people voted yes and 32% voted no. We are constantly doing that where it is a focus group. It makes us better. It makes our writing and our podcast better. So you are our focus group. And the other thing is, if you're paying $4 a month, you're not a troll.
Yeah.
You like the thing that you're paying for. So these are informed, dedicated fans of the thing we cover. And so then their opinions matter even more, and it makes our podcast better. And again, the loop never stops at this point. It's practically the same thing. Now, our podcast audience is much larger, but I don't know that there's a single person on the text who doesn't listen to the podcast, because I can't almost get that through my head. But it is a nonstop loop.
And do you see kind of that like direct effect, like where you put out a new episode and you'll see like a rush of new signups?
Not a rush. We talk about it a lot. It's hard because, as you said, we've been going 5 days a week since April 1st. So there's always a new always a new podcast episode. So, in the past, we were doing it for a year where we were going once or twice a week. And so I would think that we would see a jump. We usually put out the pod on Wednesday. Then on Thursdays, we'd see a couple people jump in. I think Thursday was probably our best subscription day. So I do think it wasn't a rush. There's news happening in college football right now, and we've seen a rush of new subscribers to the text service because of the news, and they want our constant updates on the news. But I just think it's been a sort of a gradual build for the most part with the text subscription, and especially now that the podcast is daily.
How does the text messaging fit into your day-to-day workflow? Like, what's an example of like a text you would send out, and how many would you send out a day?
So in the beginning, the advice from on top was send 1 or 2 a day. We don't want to overwhelm them. I think we've learned since then that, again, these are diehards. They're really okay with more than that a day. So there are times now, again, there's been news breaking in college football. The Big Ten has canceled its season. And so that is a big deal. On those days when there was news happening and I was talking to people and we were trying to figure out what was going to happen, I was sending 8-9 texts a day that day. And I would say, sorry to bother you, but you got to hear this. And people would say, don't stop, bring us more, bring us more, bring us more. So the thing that I say is, if it's something you're about to write, it takes 30 seconds to text it out. Mm-hmm. Because when I put up a story, I've got to put in a photo. I've got to put in the ad at the bottom. I've got to make sure the headline is spelled right. Right? You can't instantaneously put up a story. So even if I'm telling the whole world, if I tell my text subscribers 11 minutes early, that makes them feel special. If it's something that I'm in the process of reporting, that, listen, I'm going to write a story 2 days from now, but I'm talking to this person and this person and this person and this person. And I tell you, hey, you've got to hear what this person just told me. I'm going to tell the whole world 3 days from now, but I'm telling you right now, the minute I hung up the phone with this person, that makes them feel involved. And then some of it is a text that's like, hey, listen, I know you guys are all hearing this. This is what I think about it. With my 15 years of expertise, I think this is silly. I think this is smart. I think this is underrated. And it's injecting my opinion into the news. So it takes 45 seconds to send a text. And by this point, I know what they want, and they are diehards. And if it's good, you can't really bug them. If it's good, there's almost no number of texts that's too many.
And you sometimes respond individually to members who, like, you text them back. How do you decide what's worth texting? Because that can't really scale very much, obviously, because otherwise for only $4 a month, like you're giving them too much personal attention. So how do you decide what's worth responding back to personally?
So I do think a lot of it is sometimes they just want to text back and they don't necessarily expect a response. They just, because I read them. I'm not going to tell you I read 100% of the texts we get. I probably read 85 to 90% of the texts that we get back. So I can't respond to all of them. When we do a call out, we'll say, what do you think of this issue? And if we get hundreds of responses to that, I'm not going to respond to all those individually. But a lot of it is, if I send something out and someone immediately responds in the first 2 minutes and says, "Oh boy, I really thought X would happen. I can't believe you're saying Y is going to happen," then I often will respond and say, "Yeah, I didn't think so either. I'm shocked how this is going. Maybe it'll change on Tuesday." You know what I mean? Like, if it's an immediate response, every now and then I'll just have the browser up on my screen and I can see, oh, here's how many people responded 10 minutes later. Oh, the responses are up to this many. Oh, it's up to this many. And I'll just go through and I'll just shoot back a 10-word reply to 20 or 30 or 50% of those responses just to keep a little conversation going. And I think that's just a little tease. It's a little, hey, I see you, but there's no way that I can respond to everybody. And I don't think that they expect a response to everything they send back to us.
You mentioned that your bosses started taking this a lot seriously like a year ago. Obviously, this kind of correlates when you launch a service. Would you say that the podcast is much more sustainable now that you're bringing in revenue through memberships?
Yes, and we also have found a home for the podcast where we are able to have some national ads and better monetize it. So I would say the podcast interest from the company, I do think, stands alone. I do think that they started to believe that podcasts were an important part of the future for our digital news operation, and they saw that we had something going already. So we've been a leader in the podcast push for the company. I think that does stand on its own, but the tech subscription amplifies it. And I don't know that they knew at the start that tech subscriptions and podcast would work so well together. But honestly, I think we at Buckeye Talk helped show them that. And now I think in some ways they pitch that. If you have a podcast, then it really pairs well with the tech subscription. But I think they would be all in on podcasts, even if tech subscriptions didn't exist.
You mentioned that the advertising space has matured for you. In what ways has it done that?
So we used to be on our own, doing our own thing, just putting up the podcasts. And if we could sell an ad to do a live read, that was it. We're now on a national platform on Acast where they sell ads and now we get some of that, right? So it's we have some national ads on our podcast because we're part of a larger platform and part of a larger network. And we've also had some individual ads where then they have sold some live reads for us that I've done just for Buckeye Talk. But that was a big step for us, that it wasn't only us trying to sell our own stuff. We went to a larger platform where they had a way to help us share their money and everybody get a little piece of it, which we hadn't had before.
What about the advertising sales team at your newspaper? Are they taking it? Are they incorporating podcasts into their pitches or anything like that?
Our new publisher, who's new in the last year, is really aggressive on this stuff and is really open to new ideas on this. And I do think that is a factor. I don't know that we've seen a huge outcome on that yet, but I do think we have, just like we're all learning constantly as digital journalism constantly evolves. I do think we have a better handle on it. I sometimes can't figure it out. I think Buckeye Talk is quite popular. I mean, I think it really is. I was looking at some charts the other day and I was sort of surprised where we are, and I'm not sure how reliable they are, but I do think for a local single team sports podcast, we're kind of up there, and I actually think we should be making more money off of it. So I think we've learned. I hope we learn better. I think we should be able to sell more stuff because we have a loyal, and it's not niche. I mean, football's not niche, but these Ohio State fans, they are dedicated. And I think if we told them, here's an advertiser, I think it would work for those advertisers. So I think we're better at it, but I think we can still improve.
And do you get a sense that a lot of your paying subscribers are actually from outside Ohio?
We have a decent chunk of that, yeah, because Ohio State has a huge alumni base, gigantic, one of the largest in the country. It's a humongous university. And so I hear from people in Phoenix. I hear from people in LA. I hear from people in Florida. I hear from people in Germany. I hear from people not just all over the country, but all over the world. So it is a little bit, and I've tried to make that point over the years. You know, we're Cleveland.com. But our Ohio State coverage, and especially our Ohio State podcast, is not really only about Ohio or only about Cleveland, because these people graduate from Ohio State and go everywhere, or they were raised in Ohio State fan, and then went somewhere else. So
also they have rival teams that are playing in other states and the stuff like that as well.
Yeah. I mean, college football is like that. People are dedicated to the team they grew up with, and that attachment stays when they go off into the world. So I do think sometimes that makes it a little harder on advertising, because it's like, hey, go to this. We had a guy who ran a Waffle House in Akron who wanted to advertise with us, and there's some portion of our audience that's not going to be able to go to a Waffle House in Akron. But I do think it's a large enough audience that if it's the right thing, a lot of people would respond to that advertiser. So I hope we get more.
Did you read recently about this sports bundle that a lot of local newspapers are doing with their sports coverage, kind of to compete with The Athletic? Have you heard about this?
Yes. That was it. The Dallas Morning News that helped drive it. But
Yeah,
I think I saw something on it. Yeah.
So you guys aren't participating in that?
Not to my knowledge. I do think that's a little tough. I admire any kind of innovation in that thing. People are really loyal to their local team, so I do think that can be hard. We also have a wide swath at Advanced Communications. We have places, outlets all over the country, and it just so happens we have a lot of major college football hotbeds. We have people that cover Alabama, Michigan, Penn State, Oregon, and I would be very interested. We've tried it in the past. I've tried it in the past to try to bundle that. Not necessarily to sell it, but to present a cohesive college football outlet. And it hasn't worked particularly well. So I like bundling. I would like us to better bundle the podcast with the tech subscriptions, because at the moment, the podcast is the most popular thing we do, and it's completely free. We have a paywall over some stories. You have to pay for the texts, but the podcast that we put out 5 days a week is completely free. And I know I listen to some podcasts where a large chunk of the podcast is free, but then they have bonus content at the end that you have to subscribe for. There are some outlets that if they do multiple a week, some are free, some are behind a paywall. I'm interested in us exploring that, because not to hurt our listeners, just because that's our number one thing. And I think there are some people, I've had people say the text would kind of annoy me. And I get that if you're not a texting person, but I would support you. So they would pay for the podcast, but they don't really want the text. So I think if we had people pay for some of the podcasts, I personally think that would also work for us, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, there are a lot of platforms like Patreon and Substack, and I'm sure Advance could build its own custom platform where it can create, when someone becomes a subscriber, it creates a custom RSS feed, and then they can plug that into their podcast player and get exclusive podcasts. So you're saying something like that?
Something like that. And again, I'm just a guy who yells into a microphone and writes sports stories. I have complete faith in my company to figure this stuff out, because they're not always perfect, but they're always trying. I mean, they're always trying. And the Subtext is proof of that. And so I know they're thinking about this stuff and they're pushing, and there's a million things happening at once. But I do think the right kind of bundle for our particular Ohio State audience could be really successful.
Are other parts of your newspaper using this text messaging feature, or is it just your team?
No, it really spread. It really spread now. So we have it with the 4 main sports teams. And it initially started off as tied to an individual writer. But now the other 2 people who cover Ohio State with us also text with me. So it's one subscription, but then I don't have to send everything by myself. It takes a little bit of that workload off me. So they're beat specific now. We have 4 Cleveland Browns writers. All of them will text at various times under one single $3.99 plan. But I know, for instance, our editor, since coronavirus has started, they launched a free coronavirus update where they're constantly updating coronavirus numbers, the latest news, and that is astronomical as a way to keep people informed. Again, that's free at the moment, more as a public service, and I think to try to build some loyalty that Cleveland.com is there for you, but that has been incredibly successful, and I do know they've done it with politics and some culture things, and it certainly has expanded beyond just sports for the tech service.
How applicable do you think this would be for like newspapers? Like we hear about the struggle, especially of local newspapers. Like, do you think every newspaper should be experimenting with this, especially if they have like podcasts? Like, could you envision like a state house reporter who covers the capital of whatever particular state has a podcast, and political junkies for that state can text message and stuff like that? Like, do you think that this is really scalable and applicable beyond just like your sports podcast?
I do. And there were some people, that's fine. There were some people who criticized us and made fun of us when we started. And I just wanted to punch them in the throat. You know, it's like, can we try something new to connect with readers? Is that okay in the modern world to try to make money, to save journalism and serve readers? So this is what I think about this. Do you have something that you love? Do you have something that you love so much you would pay $4 a month for daily updates on it? And do you have a thing that you love that you would pay for, that if there was an expert on the thing you love, that you would be excited when that expert told you what they thought every day about the thing you love? So I think this is scalable to anybody who fits that description. If you love a band, if you love Bruce Springsteen, and there was somebody out there who was a Bruce Springsteen expert who said, I'm going to text you every day little tidbits. I'm going to do lists of the best songs ever. I'm going to talk about inside information, whatever. If you love Bruce Springsteen, $4 a month for every day. You look down at your phone, and when you look down in this crazy world, it's in your phone and it's something you care deeply about, and it's interesting and informative. So, yes, state government. Yes, local pop culture. Yes, sports teams. If it's not a thing, if it's like city council news, I don't know how many people, maybe there are enough people who really want to know about the city council news. Maybe. But I think it fits better with things that people love. And that in the middle of the day at 11 o'clock, when you're at your office, you get a little text with a little tidbit, a piece of information, and it makes you feel good for 30 seconds. And I think that's scalable, not just for newspapers or digital media outlets, but for anybody who has expertise in something people care about.
And I think you hit the nail on the head, because like I think there's a lot of flawed discussion about subscription fatigue, that like, oh, I already subscribed to X, Y, and Z, I'm not going to subscribe to this other thing. But people will pay for what they're obsessed with. So like if you're creating something that they're obsessed with, they're not going to be like, oh, I already have a New York Times and Netflix subscription or something like that, I'm not going to subscribe to another thing. No, they're going to subscribe to that thing because they want it. They don't think in their head, they don't categorize in his head that I've already subscribed to X many things, and so I can't subscribe to anything else. It's really just about creating something that that they're obsessed with. And because there are 7 billion people on this world, there are a lot of different obsessions that can be sliced and diced so many different ways, that I think there's a lot more potential subscribers out there than people realize.
And you want to be behind the scenes on the thing you love. And that's the thing. And I know that our company has had agreements with other media organizations that have tried to use this. But I mean, if you love politics and you could get text updates from a political reporter in a normal time, probably, who's like on the trail with a candidate, and they can tell you not just the news, but hey, I went to grab coffee because the bus was leaving and I stepped in a pothole and my shoe fell off and the candidate had to come over and get my shoe out of the pothole. That's a funny look, it's that kind of thing, that it's behind the scenes. And if you as a texter, the me of this, it's not news. It's not a news flash. It's a relationship. And so people know me. I say weird stuff. People know that I hate robots. They know that I love going to Chili's. I mean, they know me through the podcast and through this text platform. So you've got to relax. It doesn't mean you're not informative and that you don't have standards. But man, it's got to feel like a text from your friend, but your text that from a friend who is really smart about a thing you really care about. And if it feels like that, man, $4 a month is nothing.
And I should mention for my listeners, Subtext, even though it's owned by your parent company, it's not just available to publications owned by Advance. Like anybody can sign up for this service. It's a SaaS service. You either pay a percentage of the subscriber base, or you pay based on the number of people that you're text messaging. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. Doug, those were all the questions I had for you. Where can people find you online?
They can find me online on Twitter, where I only tweet dad jokes and links to my stories. That's at Doug Lesmerises, DougLesmerises. You can read me at cleveland.com, and you can try the text. Even if you're like a person who doesn't care about Ohio State football, but you're like, what is this dude talking about? It's just interesting, I think, to get a sense of something that digital journalists are trying. 614-350-3315. It's really easy to sign up. Try it for 14 days. Send a text back and say, hey, I heard John Simon's podcast. This thing is weird. I don't like it. And then get out for free. It's fine. So that's the best way to do it.
Okay, well, this is a lot of fun. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, thanks for joining us. I'm actually on the lookout for new guests for this podcast. So if you do interesting stuff in digital content, whether you're a full-time YouTuber, a media executive, or run a cool niche newsletter, definitely reach out. My email address is simonowens@gmail.com. Okay, see you next week.